hear the crackling from here, the sound of my home, the painting of Ariandel burning away. When the world rots, we set it afire for the sake of the next world. It's the one thing we do right, unlike those fools on the outside.
Hello everyone, this is Aegon of Astora, and welcome back to Dark Souls 3 Let's Talk Lore. This is episode number 6, being recorded on Tuesday the 8th of November. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, whenever it is you find yourself watching this. So we have a whole lot to do in this episode, and I suppose it's good that the area that that I intend for us to cover in this episode isn't especially large, because yeah, as I mentioned in the previous episode, I do think that the vast majority of the stuff we need to do is actually here at Firelink. That also includes going to the tower behind the shrine. But I don't think we're going to do that in this episode, just because of the sheer amount of things we have to do and the number of NPCs we have to talk to. And I suppose I should also apologize for the brief hiatus that I had to take from this series. I'm still not caught up on all the work that I have to do. Case in point, whereas previously I was in a pretty good rhythm of recording every Friday to post the episodes on Sunday or Monday. I'm recording this one, I said Tuesday, but it's Tuesday after midnight. And I've not been able to sleep. And whereas for the first 5 episodes of the series, yeah, I had a routine and that was working until the work really started piling up, the real life work. And so I'm still not fully caught up on everything. I have met a few deadlines, but I've been commissioned to write a chapter for a book on an educational book. Not a textbook, but a book about education and theories of learning and pedagogy and things like that. And yeah, the deadline for that is looming. I don't know exactly when it's going to be. I thought it was a hard fixed date, but it's not. It's actually a range of dates. But yeah, I just couldn't write it anymore tonight. I couldn't sleep, so I decided, even though I've not really done as much research as I had in the lead up to the first 5 episodes of the series, I figured I might as well record, and that maybe the absence of that extensive pre-recording research will actually keep the episode at a reasonable length, but I suppose we shall see. Though I didn't do any extensive research of my own, I did commit to the PC to my left here 31 slides to read, containing comments, maybe not necessarily 31 comments, because some of them stretch across multiple slides, but yeah, so we got a lot to get to, so we might as well start with Ludleth. Though I do hope you all enjoyed my blind playthrough of Ashes of Ariandel. I'm still thinking about a lot of the things that I saw and experienced in the DLC. I'm still quite satisfied with it, with the caveat that I felt like it maybe ended just as it was starting to get really, really good. And I think part of the reason for that, though we'll discuss this at much greater length later on, but I think part of the reason for that is that, yeah, the 2 DLCs are meant to be considered probably as a package, as opposed to separate episodic installments, if that makes any sense. That we're supposed to consider them together, and that, much like with Scholar of the First Sin, the definitive version of the game will be something different. And yeah, I have problems with that too, but like I said, yeah, we're not going to get into that in great deal today. I did watch sort of passively the previous episode to try and reorient myself as to where we are and what we need to do in this episode, which is why I have actually some idea of all the things we need to do because I created a list. But yeah, I can't remember if I'm reasonably certain we read these item descriptions, but just for posterity's sake. Transposing Kiln, an old transposing kiln from Corlin, crafted with stitched crystal lizard hide. Gift to Ludleth, Lord of Cinder, to conduct soul transposition. This kiln can transpose twisted souls to craft special items with their concentrated essence, deemed forbidden by those unable to make proper use of it. And we also got several episodes, the Soul of Boreal Valley Vort, which simply just points out that Vort served as an Outrider Knight, never far from the fleeting dancer. And the Soul of the Rotted Greatwood. Ever since its establishment, all manner of curses have managed to seep into the Undead Settlement. The worst of them were sealed away inside a spirit tree, but eventually the curses took their toll.
Fret not, my feet are here firmly planted. For I am a lord, and this is my throne. Listen, this might pique thine interest. Before I was a Lord of Cinder, I was a student of transposition, the process of extracting and coalescing the essence of a soul. A forbidden art that once left a foul stain upon Corlin's honor. 'Tis an art that grants powers once thought unattainable. Most transposing kilns were lost with Corland, but this place is a crossing for all manner of cursed objects. If thou happenst upon a transposing kiln, bring it to me, quick.
So he said a number of interesting things there, but him imploring us to bring it to him quick almost makes me feel like maybe we should just leave it for now. I'm not going to be an ass, I'm just kidding. But yeah, he mentioned that this place, presumably referring to Firelink, is a crossing for all sorts of... Instead of making a crappy joke, I should have committed my mind to actually remembering what it was he said. For all kinds of untoward things, I believe was the gist of what he was saying. Cursed objects is, I think, what he said. And he also mentions that Corland is destroyed, which is perhaps one explanation as to why we find him here, whereas the rest of the lords went back to what appeared to be their homelands, or at least the place of their lordship. And yeah, it's mentioned in the description of the item that the transposing kiln was banned by those who were unable to make proper use of it. And he mentions that, yeah, the transposing kiln once brought great dishonor upon Corland.
Oh, belike it is a transposing kiln in thy possession. Seen better days, but methinks it shall suffice. Now, bring to me a twisted soul. Transposition is the art of extracting and coalescing the essence of a soul. In transposing a twisted soul, its true power transferreth to thee. Thy purpose is to seek lords and slay them. What's to fear in a little transposition now?
Well said. So without further ado, I do think it's interesting that these two items seem to be the only ones that show up even if you don't yet have the soul. I'm going to assume that the trigger for these items showing up is killing that chaos demon that exists in the Undead Settlement, that hidden part of the Undead Settlement. Which is interesting. I don't really know why they would have done that, unless perhaps at some point that demon was supposed to drop a soul of a demon instead of simply a fire gem. Which I suppose is possible, seeing as there's two different options, and although the same is true of many other souls in the game, that you have two options but you only have one soul, so you gotta decide what you want, at least for that particular new game cycle. But yeah. Soul of the Rotted Greatwood gives us the Hollow Slayer Greatsword. Greatsword used for a lifetime by a masked knight. Harbors the fears that lurk within the minds of hollows, and is particularly effective against them. Bestowed to a proper Mira Knight long ago. Two-hand to execute special sword techniques. I think we're going to pick this up. I've not yet used it in this game. And the other item that the Soul of the Rotted Greatwood gets us is Astor's Spear, one of the curses that festered within the belly of the Greatwood, and a terrible weapon favored by Earl Astor the Impaler. The spear is enwreathed in rotten, heavily poisonous meat. Defeating foes restores HP. Skill Shield Splitter, take a large step forward and make a single focused thrust to puncture enemy shields and inflict damage. I almost want to get this as well so that we can equip it and look at it, although I don't know if we can because of our requirements. I can't recall whether that was Bloodborne or whether it's the same in this game or not. Because in Bloodborne you couldn't even equip weapons if you didn't meet the requirements. But yeah, so we'll leave the Soul of a Demon items for now because we obviously don't have the soul yet. But we also have Vort's Great Hammer wielded by Vort, the Outrider Knight of the Boreal Valley. Weapon is imbued with frost and causes frostbite. Frost accumulates in the body, causing frostbite, which saps one's health, lowers absorption, and slows stamina recovery. Skill is Perseverance, anchor weapon in earth to temporarily boost poise, damage reduced while activated. And we also have Pontiff's Left Eye. Bewitched ring that Pontiff Sullivan bestowed upon his knights. Recovers HP with successive attacks. Knights who peer into the black orb are lured into battles of death, transformed into frenzied beasts. No wonder the Pontiff only provides these rings to those dispatched to foreign lands. And yeah, if you look really, really closely, it does look like an eye. You're probably going to be seeing in greater detail than I am because I obviously can't zoom in on things when I'm not actually video editing, when I'm recording the footage, but yeah, I'm just looking at the details and trying to see the etching around the eye itself looks very similar to the etching that we find around those Lord Vessel type basins that we find everywhere. Not everywhere, but in 4 or 5 different spots. And I don't know if that actually means anything or if it's just, yeah. But so far in this playthrough, like, we have found quite a few connections by looking at really trivial things like this, so I'm not counting anything out, but yeah, I am fascinated by this item. But yeah, that's very interesting. So yeah, we'll certainly be coming back here throughout the playthrough. I think I'm gonna pick this up for now. We obviously can't use it yet, but... And yeah, we'll obviously be spending a lot of time here looking through item descriptions, so we'll just leave that for now.
Now, do not be away over long.
I shall not, friend, don't worry. Or at least I'll try. It's a hard playthrough to do when you're writing a dissertation and doing a million other things. So next thing we need to do is speak with Greirat. The last time we spoke with Greirat, we broke the news to him about Loretta. And yeah, we have the curl up gesture, which we get after we find him sort of distraught.
Ah,
Ah, there you are. I was thinking. You know I'm a petty thief. Well, perhaps I'll go on the prowl. Everyone's dead or hollowed away anyway, right? So I might as well fetch some weapons or treasure for you. Well, what do you say?
This is such a devious quest in many ways, in how after you send him out the first time and he comes back and he has all this great stuff and you just start thinking, oh wow, well yeah, go out as much as you want, do all the things you want to do. It's cool, you don't need my permission. Although you do, which is very interesting, but yeah, it's very from Softy, I guess, that yeah, it lulls you into a sense of security with his ability to take care of himself outside of Firelink, and then yeah, rips it away from you either in Irithyll or in Castle Lothric, depending on how you progress the various quest lines. So when we say no...
All right, fine and well. If that's your wish, I can only obey. But feel free to change your mind later. I wouldn't want to lose my touch.
Sure thing, friend.
What is it? Have you changed your mind? I'm ready to go thieving at a moment's notice. Just give me the word. Thank you. You will not be disappointed. Greirat the Thief was once a well-known name. Until I ended up rotting in a cell.
So that's very interesting that he would use the term rotting in a cell, which implies that he was in there for a very long time. So if we're to try and tease out the chronology of how things happen and how long ago they happened with Loretta, it would appear as though, yeah, it's been a while. But yeah, I'm not really sure if maybe that is just to say, because, you know, you could technically say you're rotting in a cell after having been in there for half an hour. It doesn't need to be a long period of time. But what that phrase implies is that you've been there for a while. But it could just be a coincidence that, yeah, he's just using that phrase in a way that isn't meant to actually imply that he was there for a while. So I don't know, I'm not really sure.
Goodbye. I will leave for some time. So long for now. Do stay safe, you hear? Or my efforts will have been for naught.
I certainly will, friend. You take care. Be careful. Just returning briefly before we talk to Cornyx about the fact that, yeah, not only do these NPCs need our permission, and as I'm saying that, I'm thinking about a counterexample to that as well, but not only do many of the NPCs who come to Firelink need our permission to come here, or to warp here, specifically, but yeah, he also appears to require our permission to leave. He won't leave unless we command it. He'll complain about it and make a big deal about what good is being a thief if you've nowhere to go. But yeah, he does, either he requires our permission or, you know, he is just a good servant and doesn't want to disobey our wishes. And so the counterpoint I was thinking about is that there are in fact several NPCs, and I think someone brought this up in a comment on episode 4, but I can't remember, so I sincerely apologize if you were the person who raised this question. But there are a number of NPCs, although it might have also been that I meant to bring it up in the previous episode, because there were something like 20 comments I prepared but didn't discuss in the previous episode, so again, apologies. But there are several NPCs who show up and leave at their own leisure. So Hawkwood is one such example. He's not here. Leonhard comes and goes as he pleases. He was here, and then he was gone, and now he's back again because we have a pill tongue. Aegon of Carim shows up there. Anri and Horace show up there. So yeah, there is a lot of foot traffic coming through this place, which I think problematizes a little bit the sort of simple portrait I painted of the place as this place that is ours and the Firekeepers alone, and that, you know, these people require our permission to come here, which they do to warp here, but the reality of it seems to be a fair bit more complicated, and so it's obviously not something we're prepared to discuss today, but that's something I would invite any comments on, and yeah, just as a heads up going forward. This is something to think about, and maybe it's because I don't really, or that I haven't actually bothered with pyromancy at all in Dark Souls 3, or magic at all, magic in general, beyond weapon buffs. But holy shit, there are dead crows here. I'm reasonably certain that those were not there before he arrived. Because not only there's 1, 2, 3 dead crows, and then there's like a demon type thing behind him as well. Or a goat? Wow, I never noticed that. And maybe I'm just blind, maybe it's always there, but it seems almost like they're trinkets, trophies of his? I don't know. But that's really interesting.
Ah, there you are, unkindled one. I wish to express my gratitude for trusting a lowly pyromancer and allowing me to gaze upon this majestic flame. As promised, I will impart pyromancies to you. But first, you'll need a flame of your own. Careful you don't burn yourself with it.
So he, and this is something that he discusses later with us, but with Laurentius in Dark Souls 1, Laurentius was much more upfront about the significance of a pyromancy teacher passing on a flame to a pyromancy apprentice, or a master passing on a flame to an apprentice. And yeah, it was more specifically in Dark Souls 1, Laurentius says that
a pyromancer's flame is a part of his own body. The flame develops right along with his skill. When I gave you that flame, I gave you a part of myself. Please take good care of it.
And there's an example of precisely that type of relationship, of that type of connection between teacher and student, master and apprentice, that we find later in the Crucifixion Woods, but we're not going there yet, so we won't explore that for now, but I did think it was a very interesting connection. But that, yeah, we'll talk about that later.
To learn pyromancies, you must vow to become my pupil. I know, but such is the way of the world. Respect your elders and so on. And pyromancy, of course, is no exception. Oh, we'll need a pyromancy tome to learn more advanced pyromancies. Though unorthodox, that would be the most expedient way to make progress. If this were the Great Swamp, and you had the luxury of time, we could have trained you the hard way.
Yes, I know, you had to walk uphill both ways to get your pyromancy tomes, I know.
To learn pyromancy,
Okay. So he has a pyromancy set, or pyromancer set, but it's not the set that he's wearing. And so we'll obviously revisit this a little bit later on, but for the time being, attire of pyromancers of the Great Swamp, comprised of a leather crown and animal bones. In the Great Swamp, it was thought that adorning oneself with natural fauna would provide protection from the flames of pyromancy. And this one, it says, is comprised of bronze ornamentation and animal pelt. And that in the Great Swamp, bronze was used ritualistically to ward off evil spirits and keep darkness at bay. The pyromancer wrap is leather wrapped plainly around the arms, and so specifically not the hand, because that's where the pyromancy flame would be. You obviously wouldn't want to burn your clothes off. And cloth trousers wound tightly with leather and fitted with dermis split-toe shoes. I don't know what that means, that word dermis, but presumably the shoes, they wrap around each toe, or is it maybe just the big toe? The life of a pyromancer is a life of endless trudging through marshland. So I don't know if that would actually make it easier, but that seems to be the implication. Fireball, elementary pyromancy that is often the first learned. Elementary pyromancy that is often the first pyromancy learned by students. Hurls a fireball. To use pyromancy is okay. Pyromancy of Cornyx of the Great Swamp emits a constant stream of fire. Cornyx is a venerable pyromancer of an older mold, said to have restored a number of spells lost to the past, amongst which this is the most well known. So my first thought, after reading the first bit of the item description, was going to be, I'm pretty sure that he didn't develop this one, but that's very interesting, that the act of restoration of this pyromancy basically meant that it became his. Great Combustion, pyromancy which improves upon combustion, creates a powerful giant flame in one hand. Very useful yet simple spell to use. Pyromancy is to at once know fear and longing, the resulting power of which depends on both the caster's intelligence and faith. Unique pyromancy of the Great Swamp associated with Carmina. Intense sweating increases fire damage absorption. An influential pyromancy that internalizes flame, likely forming the foundation for many subsequent spells.
do not be gone for long. What is a teacher without a pupil?
That is an excellent question, and would have been an amazing segue if we didn't have a million different things to talk about in this episode. For talking about co-intentional education, which is basically the basis for this series, and we talked about that in Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore. So, okay, so next we have to talk to Irina. Hi, friend.
Oh, Champion of Ash. Welcome back. I was not meant to be a firekeeper, but I am honored to serve you beside the bonfire. The gods are ever merciful. My gratitude lies with them and with you. I am yours now. Your wish is my command. You know, in my home of Carim, I was a nun. I would be pleased to share the tales of miracles with you. Although, to be honest, I only know a few. But if I had a divine tome, I could tell you many tales and more. Oh, only I cannot see. Terribly sorry, but you'll have to find me a divine tome in Braille.
So what's really interesting about that, and maybe it's just a game mechanic thing because she's... I was going to say because she's the only one we can give the tomes to, but that's not actually true. She says only, I cannot see, so you'll have to find me a tome in Braille. I'm just thinking about the connection between firekeepers and and the likes of Irina, who aspired to be a firekeeper, that, you know, I can't imagine that unless blindness was some sort of institutional requirement for becoming a firekeeper, or for becoming a storyteller, then, because you wouldn't imagine that Braille tomes would be so prevalent in the world. You'd think that, you know, maybe 1 in 10 at most would be, we would find 1 in 10 that were in Braille, and the rest that would just be plain text. So yeah, I don't know what to think about that. Okay, so she has Heal. Elementary Miracle cast by clerics restores HP for self and those in the vicinity. To use miracles, equip a talisman or sacred chime, and attune a miracle at a bonfire. Miracle once cherished by cleric knights gradually restores HP. Replenishment is a relic of the old Lloyd faith, whose cleric knights were unfaltering in battle. Miracle taught by Morn, the Archbishop's apostle. Cures bleeding, poison, and frost for self and those in the vicinity. Caressing Tears is a tale of the many deaths surrounding the goddess Catha, of whom Morn was a known follower. Homeward. Miracle taught to traveling clerics returns caster to the last bonfire used for resting, or to the bonfire in the shrine. It would normally link to one's homeland, only the curse of the undead has twisted its power, redirecting casters to a bonfire. Perhaps for undead, the bonfire serves as home, or as a prison, depending on how you look at it. And with the new higher resolution item images, yeah, you can see a really sort of quaint and just wonderful looking homestead.
Have a pleasant journey, Champion of Ash. I pray for your safety.
Well, thank you. If I prayed, I would pray for yours as well, but yeah. Although, yeah, we are going to follow as many of the quest lines to as many of the outcomes as is possible. But Aegon of Astora is kind of a softie, as you all know. So the sort of evil or not nice deeds will be left to another build, which, yeah, we'll be introducing very soon. Which will be, we'll have the 2 builds as primaries, and then we'll have the 3rd build. I was thinking of making a 3rd build specifically for that, but I'm out of build slots, so I might just use a miscellaneous build for the 3rd alternative, if in fact I find the time to actually make that a thing. But yeah, we'll see. So Aegon will be certainly keeping as many of the NPCs as safe as he possibly can. And where things must be done, he might be unloading it onto someone else, who is much more accustomed to and comfortable with death. And that's the only hint I'll give for now. Hi, Leonhard.
Well, hasn't it been some time? I'm Leonhard, the Ringfinger. Remember me? I slipped you those red eyes some time ago. You're making quite an effort of it, so I thought you might like to know. If you yearn for a proper red-eye orb, one that is uncracked, then kill the Dark Wraith, survivor of the land swallowed by darkness. He has been a prisoner for many ages in the deepest cell in all Lothric. I can see it in your eyes. If you didn't invade, didn't pillage, whatever would you do?
So it's funny, I do find it interesting sometimes that the game world and FromSoft by extension assumes that most players are a certain type of player. Because that's obviously not me. Like, I enjoy PvP, I enjoy invasions, but, you know, I'm, frustratingly for many of you, I try to be honorable. I try to have my own conception of honor and live up to it, which can be frustrating for other people who don't share that conception of honor. But yeah, it's interesting that the game assumes, not in all instances, but I think in most instances, that most players are not like me, and I guess maybe they aren't, I don't know. But yeah, so he says we've been making a show of it, and that's not because we've actually invaded anyone, but because we have this. We picked it up in the Undead Settlement. Proof of a Red Orb invader's victory over a host of embers. Claiming tongues as trophies was originally the practice of an infamous troop of invaders, who offered them to their speechless goddess. So it's very interesting that they're sort of mixing up two covenants here. Because an infamous troop of invaders, because there was Dark Wraith Kirk in Dark Souls 1, who, even though he was explicitly supposed to be a Dark Wraith, we discover that he was actually doing all the things he was doing to try and get humanity for Kalon, for the Fair Lady, for Kalag's sister. Because, you know, he was trying to help her by giving her humanity. And so it seems almost like this item description confuses, and maybe that's why, maybe because of Kirk, that, you know, there was this guy known as the infamous Dark Wraith Kirk. And we know that the legacy of Kirk has lived on because we later, you know, fight someone who is basically Kirk, or trying at least to be Kirk. But yeah, so it's very interesting that historical forgetting seems to be much more a part of the explicit story in this game than it was in past installments. But that's something I'm very much a fan of, at least to a degree. But yeah, so when he said that you've been making quite a show of it, the whole idea behind the quest line is that he gives you some red orbs, you go out, you invade, and the hope is, I guess, that of the 5 red orbs that you get, one of them you will be successful in killing someone, and then you come back to Firelink and you find he's there again, and he says, hey, you might almost be out of orbs at this point, but wouldn't you love a full orb? And if you look back at my blind playthrough, I'm pretty sure my reaction was like, yes, I can't believe they brought back the full eye orb. Although at that point I had already farmed something like 120 red eye orbs, but I was trying to get used to the Dark Wraith's attacks anyway, so it didn't bother me.
If you fancy a proper red eye orb, one uncracked, untainted, then kill the Dark Wraith, survivor of the land swallowed by darkness. He has been a prisoner for many ages in the deepest cell in all Lothric. I can see it in your eyes. If you didn't invade, didn't pillage, whatever would you do?
Okay, friend, so we're not going to do that today. I'm going to try and remember that when we go to do the... when we go and use the tower key, that we should use the... I think it's the lift chamber key right after that. Key to the room of the lift that descends to the deepest dungeon in Lothric. A surviving Dark Wraith from the land swallowed by darkness is said to be held there. So when we use the tower key, we'll also go and use the lift key. Hi, friend.
Oh, our champion of Ash, welcome home. This pilgrim, with a debt in death, hardly deserves to behold this divine flame. And I never would have, had you not taken me into your service. I thank you dearly for this, and assure you of my leal service. As I have said, I was once a sorcerer.
Alas, the magic of Londor is a far cry from the wonders of Vinheim. But I can teach you what I know. Perhaps, more importantly, I believe that I can help tease out your true strength. We pilgrims of Londor are keenly aware that those branded by the dark sign possess something quite special.
Come closer so I can tell you.
Then shall we begin? Bearer of the dark sign, let your true strength shine.
So yeah, he gives us what, at least at first, appears to be a free level.
Be safe, champion of Ash.
So yeah, so he refers to us as Champion of Ash. And I'm noting that because that actually changes in a little bit. So the idea behind that questline, I don't know how anyone could have stumbled upon what you're actually supposed to do without the help of guides or anything like that. Is that, you know, as you die, you start actually becoming hollow. Although, yes, so it didn't actually tell us that we had gained this item, which I think, I'm reasonably certain that's, I don't know of any other instance in which that's a thing. But it says, a black gaping hole in the flesh that resembles the brand of an undead. The darkness of humanity seeps from this bottomless, pitch-black hole. The gap filled by the accumulation of the curse. This dark sigil will never heal, but there is a tale told of a firekeeper who returned from the abyss and brought great comfort to a bearer of the curse. So, yeah. I was thinking that we would do the whole die twice, level up again, die twice, level up again thing. But I'm not sure if I want to do that in this episode just because we already have so many other things going on. So I think we're going to save that, the Dark Wraith thing, and the tower for the next episode. So we were about to warp back to the Undead Settlement, but before I warped, I noticed that Hawkwood's actually back. So let's say what's up.
Ooh, yet to give in, eh? Good. The Firekeeper must be twitching with delight. But what do you really know about these Lords of Cinder, these supposed legends? Let's take Aldrich, for one. A right and proper cleric. Only he developed a habit of devouring men. He ate so many that he bloated like a drowned pig, then softened into sludge. So they stuck him in the Cathedral of the Deep. And they made him a Lord of Cinder, not for virtue, but for might. Such as a lord, I suppose. But here I ask, do we have a sodding chance?
So I'm reasonably certain we haven't gotten that dialogue yet from him. But we also have some translations here courtesy of Yosaho, who in the Beside the Bonfire podcast, I said that I have a Japanese viewer, and Yosaho, I must apologize for assuming that you were Japanese, because then I received a comment that basically said, I'm actually not Japanese, but I am studying Japanese, so my apologies for assuming that you were in fact Japanese. But all the same, incredibly useful and helpful, the translations that you provide, so thank you. So, first and foremost, in Japanese, Aldrich's name is actually just Eldritch. And I remember thinking that it seemed, the name Aldrich seemed like an allusion to, you know, something about Eldritch truth, Eldritch horrors, things like that. And yeah, it translates directly to Aldrich from Japanese. So I guess for the English one, they wanted to make it seem a bit more, because Eldritch would make for kind of a strange name, because it's more of a descriptive term than it is a term itself. So, or, you know, a proper noun. So in the original Japanese text, Hawkwood actually says, "Did you know about Lord of Cinders, the true nature of these so-called heroes? Let's take Aldrich for one. He was a cleric, but he devoured men like he's gonna vomiting until he bloated like a drowned pig and melted to sludge. So he was imprisoned in the Cathedral of the Deep. Then Aldrich became a Lord of Cinder. Not depending on looks or personality, just that might. Lord is something like that. Do you still want to fight such a thing?" So no right and proper, no developed, no they made him. It's very clear, and it's very clear that Aldrich was imprisoned. So yeah, interesting.
At the foot of Lothric Castle, an old path still runs below the tower in the Undead Settlement. It was used to transport sacrifices to the Cathedral of the Deep. You should see where it leads, if you've the stones for it.
I certainly do, friend. That's where we're headed right now. How'd you know? You're so smart.
You haven't given up yet? Then you're a brusher lad than I thought. You can make better use of this. I don't need it. Not now I've flown the coop.
So basically he's given up. And so yeah, he doesn't need heavy gem. A gem of infused titanite, famously used to forge Farron greatswords. Use an infusion to create heavy weapons. A warrior can appreciate a heavy weapon, for they scale effectively with strength.
The Undead Legion of Farron is a caravan of undead, sworn by wolf's blood to contain the abyss. The Legion will bury a kingdom at the first sign of exposure. Joyous bunch, really. Gaining admission to the Legion is a matter of some ceremony. Inside their keep, snuffing out the flames of 3 altars opens the door to the...
You know, we're going to leave that dialogue because it's going to be a while till we actually go to the lower swamp. So we're going to leave that until it's relevant. But yeah, I do like Hawkwood, and I especially like how he's not simply crestfallen, that there's much more to his story than there has been for any of the previous Crestfallens. And correctly or otherwise, I consider Gilbert from Bloodborne to be basically the Crestfallen of that game. He serves essentially the same function, and his quest line sort of just ends in a similar manner to those of the other ones. But yeah, Hawkwood is more than that, and I appreciate that a lot. So, very interesting to note, I mentioned in the previous episode that when we look down near the start of the Road of Sacrifices, that we see that was almost really bad. So a soul of a deserted corpse dropped from this rat just now, or this hound rat rather. And yeah, we had a comment from JSF explaining the whole hound rat thing, but we're going to go over that later. But in the previous episode, I pointed to the start of the Road of Sacrifices as the place where you where you can first catch a glimpse of what appears to be the deep. I was actually... it's not the start of the Road to Sacrifices. It's the first bonfire in the Cathedral of the Deep. So before the... Cleansing Chapel, the bonfire before that one. So we're not going to come into contact with it today, but it is interesting to note that right here, or earlier near the dilapidated bridge, when you look down, you don't see anything deep-esque or abyss-esque. It's just pale. Something that I meant to mention on several different occasions when we were back at Firelink is all of the NPCs making reference to the divine flame, the wonderful flame. That they all mention that they're very happy to be able to serve us by the flame. And so that goes back to our discussion from, I believe, the first or the second episode, or both, of understanding Firelink not necessarily as a location that is meant to be the same as the one from the first game, but rather it's more like just a shrine where the fire is worshipped. And for whatever reason, perhaps because we defeated Udex Gundyr and we're doing all these other awesome things now, that, yeah, they're all really impressed by how divine the flame is and how radiant it is. So I have no idea how we're going to handle this. Several weeks ago, in preparation for this episode, I spent some time practicing my parry on this enemy, and it just wasn't working. It was not good. So, yeah. We should look at this definitely more as a beginning than an end of a conversation, because we're going to be talking about Irithyll at great length later on. But for now, just, I guess, worth noting that much like Vort, this Outrider Knight appears to be devolving into a beast. So it's a shame that we didn't actually get the Pontiff's Right Eye ring, because we might have been able to read it right from the item description. But yeah, it's really interesting. And tragic and sad and all those things. I think we're going to run by him and get the bonfire before we fight him. It's kind of cheesy, but yeah, I don't want to have to deal with editing runbacks, because I had to do enough editing for my blind playthrough of the DLC. Those of you who have seen it know exactly what I'm referring to, so I'm not in the mood for doing that again. And I'm still very rusty because I've not had a lot of time to play Dark Souls 3 lately, aside from recording things. That's pretty much the only time I've been playing. Didn't mean to jump there. Only Aegon would title an episode Road to Sacrifices when we don't even get there until like 40 or 50 minutes into the actual episode. Apologies for that. And so, very interesting that something I never noticed before. I noticed that they had blue eyes. But the trail effect, it's like the exact same effect that the red eyes have, but just it's in blue. The way it sort of trails as they're moving. But But I'm reasonably certain that this is specific to the Outrider Knights, and that none of the other... excuse me, and that none of the other enemies in the game actually have blue eyes. Except perhaps for Vorten the Dancer, but they too are Outrider Knights, so... I don't know. I don't know what to think about that. The other question would be... why is he here? Why is he guarding this particular spot? And given that this is the path to... as Hawkwood mentioned, that this is the where the sacrifices were carried from the Undead Settlement to the Cathedral of the Deep. So the Undead Settlement is in a subservient role in its relationship to the Cathedral of the Deep. So the Cathedral of the Deep as a place that serves the interests of Irithyll of the Boreal Valley in general, and those of Aldrich and Sullivan in particular. Yeah, makes a fair bit of sense why this Outrider Knight would be here. One, to keep the undead in the settlement so that they don't escape the settlement is obviously a major consideration, but two, so that, yeah, there's not an uprising of sorts. As I believe we might have discussed, but at the same time, and maybe part of the issue here in trying to tease out why he's here is the fact that, yeah, he doesn't really seem to be all that aware of himself and things that are going on. He's a beast, as the item description alluded to earlier. So though that may have been his original reason for being here, I don't know that that still applies. But yeah, I guess time to die. Yep. Irithyll's Straight Sword bestowed upon the Outrider Knights of the Boreal Valley. This weapon is enshrouded in frost and causes frostbite. Every Outrider Knight one day devolves into a beast, constantly hounded by Pontiff Sullivan's black eyes. So earlier when we were looking at the ring, I don't know if the ring mentioned Pontiff Sullivan's black eyes, but yeah, the ring, I pointed to it and then I got sort of mesmerized by the embroidery around it. But the ring, the eye in the middle of the ring is very much a black eye. Not in the sense that, you have bruising around your eye sockets, but the eye itself is black. It's really the only way I can describe it. Okay, yeah, I was expecting that we would die to him at least once. I guess it doesn't hurt that we're already level 47. And that's probably the reason why we didn't. And that's thanks once again to the Memetim, so a shout out to the Memetim once again for helping us out with that. So, for those of you who have already played the DLC, and if you haven't, I'm not really going to give huge spoilers, but I'm going to talk about things that happen in the DLC. We might touch on... I'll just say, if you haven't played the DLC, maybe go do that and then come back and watch this, because I was trying to maybe talk about small details, but not the overarching story, but small details to me might be important to someone else if you've not played it, so yeah, I would go play it and come back if you're spoiler conscious. But even though for the duration of my having played this game prior to the DLC, I looked at the Corvians and just always thought, oh my gosh, they look terrible. They're in such bad shape. But as we saw in the DLC, they're in much better shape than many of the Corvians. I was going to say contemporaries, but it's not entirely clear that they're even contemporaries. Like many of its kin, perhaps. But yeah, whatever the case, the Corvians that we find in the painted world of Ariandel are in much, much worse shape than the Corvians that we find here. Or at least that's how it appears to me. Because I've been thinking a lot about... I don't know what the NPC is named, or if it even has an official name at this point, but and maybe I should look into getting the official guide for the DLC. But yeah, but so I'll call the NPC the Corvian citizen, or the settlement citizen, because it's the NPC we find in the Corvian settlement, who, with one line of dialogue, really, really hammered home some of the themes and accentuated some of the themes of the main game. And most notably that sometimes you just have to let things die in order to start over. And I'm going to wait till we get to the DLC to talk about this, but there's a book that very much reminded me of, called After This Nothing Happened by Jonathan Lear. So I'm going to leave it at that. If anyone wants to check it out, I'll leave a link in the video description below. I don't agree with the whole book. There are certain aspects of it I find very problematic, but I do think it's very interesting. That in the context of the book, the title of the book, After This Nothing Happened, refers to something that an elder, I believe, of the Crow Nation in the United States, an American Indian, who in describing the experience of his people in the post-contact era, got to a certain point and then just sort of said, you know, after this, nothing happened. And so Jonathan Lear spends the entire book basically trying to figure out what he meant by that. And one of the things that he suggested is that after this nothing happened isn't necessarily him giving up, but him allowing for the death of the Crow subject so that a new subject can come into being, so that a new subject can be born and made by a new generation of people. And yeah, so like that line that NPC, the Corvian citizen, has really had me thinking, where he said, you know, the one thing that we've done right here is that we've, I don't recall the exact wording, but he said something to the effect of,
Oh, my, thank you. I can hear the crackling from here, the sound of my home, the painting of Ariandel burning away. When the world rots, we set it afire for the sake of the next world. It's the one thing we do right, unlike those fools on the outside.
The one thing we do right here, unlike in the outside world, is that when the rot gets bad, we burn it away. We do away with it. We don't allow things to devolve to the point where just awful shit happens. But that's precisely what the Corvians here seem to be dealing with, even if they don't necessarily appear to be in as bad shape as the Corvians we find in the painting. But it's possible that the painting is in a much later state of that de-evolution, that entropy has taken hold, a much firmer hold in that world because of its transient nature and all that. So I'm mostly just thinking out loud because I'm still trying to process the story of the DLC and what it means, especially in relation to the main game. But that broader sort of commentary on the story of the main game is I think the most valuable thing that at least I've taken away from the DLC so far. And if not valuable, then the most personally interesting to me. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to hearing all of your thoughts on this place and on the Corvians in general, just because I feel like this is one of those areas that I run through so much that I don't generally stop to look at everything. And so yeah, so I don't know. I've not really put a heck of a lot of thought into the Corvians beyond sort of the relation to the DLC in the last week or two. And some of the things that JSF and Cassidy have mentioned in their discussing Dark Souls 3. I'll have to go back and look at some of the DLC enemies to see whether or not they have wings or the appearance of being able to sprout wings. Because, yeah, yeah, it's kind of normal for them to have wings. Why are they sort of inside, why are the wings inside their bodies? In sort of an alien-esque way, where it just sort of bursts out. And they're obviously out of place. They are very obviously out of place, and it's more obvious in other areas, most notably in Yoel the Boreal Valley, where near the Church of Yorshka we find a grave on the outside, and there's a Corvian sort of, the Corvian appears to be praying at the grave. But what I think the Corvian is actually praying at is the homeward bone that's there. If you kill the Corvian, there's an item there, right in front of the grave, and the item is a homeward bone. So it seems to me like, yeah, at least in that particular instance, the message that From is trying to get across is these creatures all really miss their home, and they're really hard off because they're not at home. One thing I'm still trying to figure out, though, is why they're not. Was there some sort of seam that opened up in the painting, or wherever the Corvians actually originally came from? Corvia? I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's in an item description somewhere, and I'm just too tired to actually remember, but over there we have a Corvian storyteller. A Corvian storyteller that is very obviously presently engaged in telling stories. And so, this might not be directly related to what FromSoft was trying to get across by describing these enemies as Corvian storytellers. But that book chapter that I'm writing that I mentioned earlier, if I didn't edit it out, when I was blabbing at Firelink, it's in part about stories, and about the importance of stories and storytellers. And in the context of Aboriginal people in Canada, storytellers are, in a very real sense, historians. So that is to say, elders of Aboriginal communities. They are, in many of these communities, the last link that the present generation has to, you know, thousands and thousands of years of the generations that preceded them. And so Corvian storyteller, and obviously storyteller has to do with miracles and conveying the divine tomes of the gods, but I do think there's a very real sense in which the storytellers are also historians, trying to maintain some sort of connection between the land and the Corvians and their people. And that's because that's another concept that is very, very important when, not for all Aboriginal communities, but for many of them, because it's important to understand that they're not all the same. And many of them, in fact, are very, very different. They all have their own unique histories and backstories, and yeah, they can't all be painted with a single brush. But the processes of colonial violence that they've been subjected to are, to some degree or another, uniform in many places. But yeah, part of the most damaging part of the violence in colonial violence comes from being displaced from one's own land, from the land with which you have a very, very singular connection. Another book that's relevant to this that I raised, I think, in the previous episode, or the one prior to that, is Do Glaciers Listen by Julie Cruikshank, where, in a very real sense, the glaciers of the Pacific Northwest are imbued with knowledge. They contain the knowledge of thousands of generations of the people who were, you know, native to North America, the First Nations of Canada, and in some cases Alaska. But yeah, the connection to one's landscape is very, very important, and I'm trying to think of how deep I want to get into this right now, and it's again, because I didn't actually prepare anything in advance of today's episode, like I had been doing in the episodes leading up to this one. So I'm going to leave that for now, lest I blab for much, much too long about it. But suffice it to say that, yeah, under colonialism, one of the most destructive aspects of colonial rule is displacing people from their land, because land is more than just, you know, property and title. It in many cases connects peoples to who they are, to their identity, to their well-being, their way of life. And in this case, we find these enemies scattered all throughout the world of Dark Souls 3, as well as we've learned since the release of the DLC, the painting of Ariandel, or the painted world of Ariandel, rather. And yeah, so I think we're going to leave it at that for now, but suffice it to say that I always feel bad killing the Corvians here, because they do remind me in a lot of ways of a lot of the stuff that I come into contact with a lot of the stuff I see and learn and hear about when doing my research. We find 2 tipped carts here. Too bad we missed that. I wasn't sure they could be parried, but I guess now I know. Something I just noticed about the staff is that the and it disappears when they die. We also have a question later about ragdolls, which I actually find very interesting. A comment rather to go over about that. It has almond-shaped protrusions coming out the end that really remind me of amygdala from Bloodborne. I don't know if that means anything, but... Speaking of not knowing whether things mean things, we have a prime, grade A example of that here. Look at that badass slow walk. Oh my gosh. Oh. Friend? You okay just hanging out there, friend? Alright, cool. Butcher's knife with an oddly large blade, wielded by the mad woman haunting the road of sacrifices. Squarely landed hits restore HP. Back in the Undead Settlement, the woman acquired a taste for human flesh, of which she took glee in partaking. So we have another comment which... from JSF, which speaks to the purpose of those bowls that the... How have I already forgotten their names? The bowls that those giant undead guys were carrying. Okay, so we got the brigand axe as well, and now the brigand set. Hollow man serpents, that's what they're called. Yeah. That's, the weapon that they're carrying basically, yeah, implies that the things that in their bowls, all body parts. And so, I don't know where this mad woman fits into that. Because obviously she's a reference to Maneater Mildred in Dark Souls 1, as well as the Butcher ladies in the Depths. And yes, they're both women. Miyazaki has confirmed that. As well as Laurentius, who says that...
Yeah. I would have been at supper without you. Been eaten alive. I shudder to think. Thank you. Thank you dearly. I am Laurentius, Lord the Great Swamp. I will not forget my debt to you.
But Maneater Mildred was herself also a joke that FromSoft, someone at FromSoft was playing in the middle of a network test. I don't remember where I heard that, but... Then there was also a character in Dark Souls 2 who... And I can't even remember her name, because it was in the part of the pit in Majula, where I rarely actually even went. So the part before the Black Gulch where her invasion would be triggered. And so, like, I guess it makes sense when you consider that a version of this enemy was in Dark Souls 2 as well, but I don't know. I guess just a reference that's used to flesh out the lore of one of the areas, which kind of makes sense. I don't know. Is there anything over here, friend? No, no, just do your thing. No. We could have been friends. So yeah, again, I'm constantly looking down, trying to see, and I suppose in whatever wooded area this is, presumably not one of great import, judging by the quality of, I guess, the textures used here. Yeah, and it's instant death dropping down there. But yeah, I'm still not seeing the deep anywhere. But yeah, so I don't know what to think about her, but I'm certainly open to ideas. That is one instance in which, you know, I don't feel so bad saying that, you know, like, you know, I'm obviously not going to snap into LOL fan service mode, especially after how much I've railed against that for the last 5 episodes, or for the 5 episodes preceding this one. But I don't know. I don't know about that character, or whether there's actually anything to be gained by having her here. Certainly, I thought it was hilarious, and I was smiling when doing my blind playthrough, and I walked around the corner, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's slow walking at us like a badass. It's Mildred, she's back! I don't remember exactly how I reacted, but I seem to recall it being something like that. Whoops. Whoops. That was embarrassing. No, friends, you guys can just go back to doing your thing. I'm just heading on through. So, earlier, interesting that earlier, there was only one of them here when we came up here just now. And I was about to question, where are you going, friend? God damn it. I was about to question whether the scream of that storyteller was the trigger. And it does appear as though indeed it is. Because as I was about to start questioning it, she screamed and then, yeah, woke up, went down there, came around. Wow, I'll give that Corvian some mad props. That is some determination right there. No! Oh, I'm sorry, everyone. Oh, that is embarrassing. I really should have spent some time just playing before I started recording this episode. Because, yeah, I didn't play for almost a month between episode 5 of Let's Talk Lore. Maybe I'm jumping down on the wrong spot. I seem to recall being able to jump. Screw it. We're doing it again. No! Yeah, I didn't play for pretty much a month in between recording episode 5 of this series and then doing the blind playthrough of Ashes of Ariandel. And then that took much longer than I expected just because I got my ass kicked by the final boss so many times. So many times. Such that, yeah, I've not played Dark Souls 3 since I finished recording that playthrough. So, I'm rusty on several different fronts right now. But what we are going to do, rust is no excuse for stupid play though. And I've been doing some stupid things, so we're going to clear out the upper area before we even try to go down there. Because I can't remember, I don't think that was the right spot, but I seem to recall that's where I've always dropped down. So that scream seems to aggro, so similar to in the high wall, yeah, the scream aggroes the rest of them. Oh, one of them's got red eyes. Yep, there it is. And so you can see that it's the same effect that the Boreal Knight had, but... or the Outrider Knight, rather. The blue Tearstone ring totally saved us there. Wow, we have so many rings that we're not wearing that we could have been wearing. Silly me. Again, I apologize, everyone. Could have used the bleed resistance there. I don't think Flynn's will actually do anything for us here. Yeah, my bad. But yeah, I thought about playing and then I was like, oh, why don't I just record, because I can occasionally get into issues, run into issues when I can over-prepare for things, and do it in such a way that I end up just preparing and preparing, and then by the time it comes to actually start the thing that I've been preparing for, I've over-prepared to the point where, yeah, I just get overwhelmed by the thing, and then I'm far less likely to actually start doing it, because I've spent so much time preparing. And as a result of all the falling deaths, which were no fault of the Corvians, and entirely my fault. But nevertheless, I'm no longer in... Oh, beautiful, we got their drops. I was going to say I'm no longer in a charitable mood. Corvian Great Knife, Dagger of the Unwanted, those guided by heretical storytellers. A rather large dagger with a powerful attack, but this transparent attempt to intimidate foes reveals much about its owner's fears. It's such an interesting... a great knife is such an interesting idea. And we also picked up the Brigand stuff that we haven't actually looked at. Again, my apologies, everyone. Got the Brigand Twin Daggers. These paired daggers are the preferred weapons of the Brigands of a distant land. When two-handed, the wielder holds a blade in each hand, allowing for divergent attacks that include left-handed moves. Hood from a foreign land, probably belonged to a brigand who met his match. In foreign lands, undead were banished to send a message to the populace, and when the message was not heard, they banished the living too. That is very interesting. Who is the they? I guess just a general ominous they. So brigand is a word that the definition of which I should be at least somewhat familiar with, but I'm not. So I'm going to see if I can put a thing on the screen now. But yeah, I some sort of message. I wonder what the message was. And that brigand obviously met her or his end by at Maneater Mildred's hands, or whatever we're supposed to refer to that enemy by. Did the guide really not have... Sorry, I'm just looking at my guide now because the list of enemies for this area includes many that are in areas that we're not going now. So the Road of Sacrifices includes it includes the Crucifixion Woods, but I don't remember whether it mentioned a name for that NPC, so I'm just gonna look that up real quickly. Okay, in looking at the list of enemies, the only one I'm not 100% sure to which enemy it refers is the Poison Horn Bug. And we'll talk about the names of the other enemies later because they're very interesting, I think. But once again, I'm faced with the same question that I raised in the previous episode about the extent of the specificity of the enemy names in Prima's guide. Because though it doesn't mention a name for that NPC, it says another unkindled. So it refers to that NPC as another unkindled. Which, you know, I have no idea whether the people writing it because, you know, when it was Future Press, we knew at least two of the authors of the guide, that is Franz and Marcus, a German spy and epic name bro. We knew that at least two of the writers really understood the importance of specificity when it comes to item descriptions and names and things like that. But I don't know, you know, any of the people who worked on the Prima guide, and, you know, I don't know whether A, there's that same attention to detail there, or whether B, if they were given the time and the resources necessary to actually, you know, pay that much attention to the details. Because it says another unkindled, but for all I know, the people writing the guide might be thinking that unkindled is just a synonym for NPC, or PC, and, you know, whether or not it's a player character is just, yeah. Because it says another unkindled. It doesn't mention her name, it just says another unkindled is waiting for you there, and she's very tough, or something to that effect. And it's capitalized, too. So if it's another unkindled, they would be... Yeah, see, I don't even know. Because the item description for the Butcher's Knife suggests that that person was once a resident of the Undead Settlement. But I suppose if we're to accept that that person's an unkindled, which I don't think is necessarily a given, then that would suggest that that person was sent, you know, that they defeated Vort in their world, but then why are they in our world if they're an unkindled? Yeah, see, I don't know. I don't know how specific that we're supposed to take their usage of that term. But I'm very interested in, as always, and of course, hearing what all of you out there think about it. So, this is like the only place left. And I've already died, I think, 3 times there. And yeah, the one with the red eyes is actually up there. It's the exit to the shortcut. But it was aggroed by the storyteller. Okay. It's got an arrow sticking out of your face, no big deal. Oh, it doesn't know where to go. Alright, I think I see what I was doing wrong. I think you're supposed to just drop down here. That looks much easier. We did it! Oh, that really shouldn't be such a triumphant moment, but... So, we have a dog here. I believe they're specifically referred to as... Yeah, same... again, in the guide, it doesn't actually mention anything special about this starved hound here, but it does refer to it as a starved hound. So it doesn't move any slower than the rest of them, but it does have a unique model. Oh god, you're hideous. It does have a unique model. And I originally thought that this suggested that it was pregnant, but it actually, upon further inspection and reading comments from all of you out there, that and during the live stream, all the lore chat that goes on in the chat, that it seems more likely that this is actually just a distended stomach. Or just a bloated stomach. Because here we have just... Yeah, you can see right here that this one is very much a starved hound. And this one is also a starved hound, but yeah, with a distended stomach. So I don't know enough about what causes something like that to say for certain. But we do have 2 bodies here. And they contain a Braille Divine Tome of Carim and Morn's Ring. A sacred Braille Tome from Carim, filled with advanced miracles. Give to a storyteller to learn advanced Carim miracles. In the Way of White, there is a tradition of placing great faith in the words of the blind, and Braille tomes are not unusual. Okay, so all of my questioning earlier about why they would exist in such abundance, I went on and on and on about that, so maybe I'll edit it down a little bit, but yeah, there's the answer right there. And Morn's Ring, a malformed ring given to knights of Carim, boosts miracles. Morn served the goddess Catha and later became an apostle of the archbishop. They labored together to provide comfort to the suffering. So at a certain point, we're going to have to go into Dark Souls 2 and look at some item descriptions for things relating to Caitha, because there is a fair bit of it, and I'm reasonably certain that Caitha was not in Dark Souls 1 and was only in Dark Souls 2. And so as this this impure Corvian approaches us, pay attention to the way the eyes sort of, the light sort of trails from its eyes. It's the exact same effect that we found on that Outrider Knight, but yeah, in red as opposed to blue. No! I guess I should have seen that coming, but yeah, you could definitely see the eyes trailing downwards as it plummeted to its death. Well, sorry, friend. Okay, we finally did it. Wow. I didn't think that the first roadblock in this playthrough would be this gosh darn place. Especially we're at level 47, that's ridiculous. Oh, interesting to note. Earlier when we looked at the status screen after getting the Dark Sigil, we did not have a hollowing meter. So even though we had the Dark Sigil on our person at that point, we hadn't died, so we hadn't actually started to go hollow as a result of that. And we'll talk much more about the mechanics of that, I think, in the next episode, when we do the rest of that and we talk to Yuria and stuff like that, because that's going to require us to introduce the second player character for this playthrough, and I'm not ready to do that just yet, especially, yeah, given how long this episode will be. But yeah, the degree to which this character is cursed. This character will turn hollow if the curse grows too severe. So I really wish they went further with that. But yeah. So it doesn't look too bad right now. Yeah, still looking pretty good, except for the really sort of low quality textures. So there's some black stuff around our face, but I think that's meant to be blood. But yeah, I think that's everything for the Road of Sacrifices, but we shall see. I'm sure you will all let me know if I miss anything. It's our friend. Two friends. I'm sorry. I always forget about Horace because I like Anri so much. Hi, friend.
Oh, hello. How do you do? I am Anri of Astora, unkindled like you. This is Horace, a friend and travelling companion. Are you too in search of the Lords of Cinder? We are well along the Road of Sacrifices. Below us is the Crucifixion Woods. Beyond the flooded woods lies Firelink Keep, home of the Undead Legion. Further yet is the Cathedral of the Deep. We seek the cathedral, home of the grim Aldrich. We may go our separate ways now, but we are both seekers of lords. The next time we cross paths, one may find the other in a time of need. May the flames guide your way.
So we are both seekers of lords. And so I'm just thinking back to the whole, you know, whether that Mildred NPC is an unkindled. And it is kind of an open question as to whether or not Anri is in fact herself unkindled, or whether she's just playing the part. I'm not entirely decided myself. I could go either way. But that's something that, yeah, we'll talk about a great deal later on. Oh, I told myself I wasn't going to laugh there because whereas at first I was just like, what the heck is going on? I couldn't help but laugh, and I guess I still can't help but laugh, but he doesn't have a tongue. And I didn't really think much of this previously, but in Dark Souls 1, one of the two knights, I think it's Nico. There's Vince and Nico who accompany Rhea of Thorlin on her undead mission. And one of the two young male clerics who are meant to accompany her on her journey, in addition to Petrus of Thorlin, yeah, doesn't quite sound like that. It's more like...
Oh, you again. What business have you? I don't suppose we can help, though. We accompany my lady on her righteous mission. It is quite a chore, but I'm stuck with her, and Nico too. I can't very well abandon them now.
So it doesn't quite have the same, because this sounds really raspy. So I don't know what it actually sounds like when a person with no tongue tries to talk, but yeah, I'm wondering if anyone else thinks that maybe with Vince or Nico, whichever one doesn't really talk, whether that person might not themselves have a tongue. But that aside, we had the Way of Blue covenant given to us by High Priestess Emma. Pale blue sheepskin parchment featuring an illustration of the moon, symbol of an ancient accord. Members of the Way of Blue are the beneficiaries of an ancient accord. When a dark spirit threatens them, a blue spirit will grant them assistance and help to root out the invader. Summoning takes place automatically while this is equipped. But then we also have, this was just given to us by Horace. Faded sheepskin parchment depicting the dark moon and a sword, equipped to pledge oneself to the Blue Sentinels' covenant. When a member of the Way of Blue is threatened by a dark spirit, the Blue Sentinels, in compliance with an ancient accord, assume the form of blue spirits and help to root out the invader. So, I don't know. I don't know what to think about this. But I'm sure some of you have ideas, so again, I'm looking forward to hearing them. Perhaps figuring out why he has this, the Blue Sentinels Accord, might help us, together with where they got their armor and their weapons, might help us figure out what the deal is with them, perhaps, but yeah. Again, I'm undecided about this, as with many things, open to be swayed in either direction based on where we take this. But yeah, I think there's arguments that could be made either way.
Oh yes, Horace. He's not very talkative. But don't think ill of him. He's an upstanding, kind-hearted knight, a fine partner for this grueling journey. Without his help, I would have cursed this onerous duty long ago.
So yeah, she's not entirely forthcoming. She says he's not very talkative, instead of telling us the truth, which is that, yeah, he had his tongue ripped out. And I guess he's not very talkative is sort of like a jokey way to, you know, convey something really dark and depressing. And maybe that's what she's going for there, but either way, she's not telling us the full story.
We are well along the road of sacrifices. Beyond the flooded woods lies the next time we cross. May the flames...
May the flames guide your way as well, friend. I'm sorry, friend, I shouldn't be laughing. Whoever did that to you, they shouldn't have done it to you. I'm sorry. Alright, back to Firelink. Sirris is here. Alright, while we're talking to every NPC in this game, we might as well talk to her too. Hi, friend.
You're an unkindled, aren't you? I am Sirris of the Sunless realms, former servant of the divinity. Duties we each bear, but one's duty is a solitary affair. I doubt we've much to gain from fraternization. Blessing of the moon upon your journey.
Same to you, friend. So she's very guarded about, much like Anri. But who she is, what her duty is, where she got these really, really snazzy digs. Really, really snazzy.
I doubt we've much to gain from fraternization. Blessing of the moon upon your journey.
Very professional and knightly. But yeah, we're gonna have lots more to talk about when it comes to Sirris. Where's the Firekeeper? You need to stand up.
Welcome home, Ashen One. Speak thine heart's desire.
We need to do the outro in a little bit, so...
Very well. Then touch the darkness within me. Take nourishment from these sovereignless souls.
But might as well spend these souls first, because gosh knows we're not doing a very good job of keeping them thus far. At least today.
Farewell, Ashen One. May the flames guide thee.
Okay, so before we get to the comments, it occurred to me that I didn't really appropriately tie up a couple of loose ends, but let's start with the spot under the spot under the bridge where I died so many times trying to jump there, where we find, so starting with the dogs, I went and I rewatched JSF and Cassidiv's discussing Dark Souls 3, a link to which will be in the video description below, and whereas earlier I just sort of killed the Hound as fast as possible, didn't actually, you know, stop to check out what its moveset or whether its moveset might be different. And JSF pointed out in that video that, yeah, the one with a distended stomach actually vomits on you. I guess in a similar way to what happens in the Cornyx Settlement in the DLC. But with that said, yeah, it has a sort of vomiting attack, indicating that it was probably feasting on the corpses of those two people from Carim, one presumably a maiden like Irina, and one presumably a knight or cleric like Aegon. So I suppose you could make an argument that it's them, that it's Aegon and Irina in sort of like an alternate universe kind of way, because it certainly wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world in, you know, given the cosmologies that we've discussed, but I don't think that explanation is necessary, but rather that Dark Souls 3, more generally, more broadly, is a game that's really characterized by an abundance of dualities, of these push and pull relationships between various things, and sort of the cyclical and rubber bandy nature of those relations. And so in this instance, it's maidens and clerics, maidens and knights. Another example from the DLC is the second phase of the Ariandel and Frida boss fight, which is defined by this sort of contrast between the frost of Frida's weapon and the fire of the basin that Ariandel is coming after you with. But yeah, and then just more broadly, even more broadly than that, heat and cold, light and dark, rich and poor, decadence and squalor, teacher-student, as we learned earlier, and apprentice-master, and twins. Twins is another really huge thing. There are the two dragons in Lothar Castle, there's the twin sages, there are the twin princes. So there's a lot of dualities, but there's also a lot of third ways that are opening up. But yeah, we're getting a bit off track. So yeah, you could explain that as potentially maybe being the corpses of another dimension's Aegon and Irina, but I don't think that explanation is necessary, but rather that there are many such duos that exist from Carim and elsewhere. Even Anri and Horace, you could look at them as a duo, because they don't function properly when they're separated. They only function properly when they're together. But yeah, again, I could go on and on and on. So I suppose before we get to the comments, though, the last thing that we need to address is what the Road of Sacrifices is, because we didn't really even address that. And it seems pretty clear to me that going back to, I believe, the first episode of the Undead Settlement, episode 4, when we discussed the whole notion of bio-value, and the bio-value in this case appears to be human dregs, or something approximating them that is used either to constitute the deep, or that is perhaps a fuel source for maintaining control over the deep, or something like that. Whatever the case, they are extracting bio-value from the undead in the Undead Settlement, and they're using it, I think, to support, to control, to make up, to construct the deep. But there's a lot of speculation there, but I think that's mostly based on the evidence in the game, and some of the things that we've discussed so far. But yeah, something to think about going forward. But so the Road of Sacrifices, put simply then, is just the road along which this fuel, these human dregs presumably, were carted off to the Cathedral of the Deep, where we find perhaps the entrance to the deep, or something like that. Oh, can you imagine? I'm hoping that the second DLC takes us to the deep, or a deep-like place. I think that would just be incredible. Because yeah, there's a lot of just shooting in the dark here, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. So before we get to the comments, as always, please accept my sincerest apologies if I don't read your comment. There are too many, and they're pretty much all great, and I wish I could read them all, but we simply don't have the time. So please accept my apologies if you're among those whose comments I did not read. JSF writes, regarding hound rats, there's a recurring thing in the Souls games where large dogs and or rats are officially called dog rats, which is a translation of the word Inonizumi, sorry, which is literally just the words for dog and rat combined. That is dog rat. So hound rat is likely just another way of saying that. I think it just means dog-sized rat. The Blighttown dogs are actually canine/rat hybrids, like the Royal Rat Authority. In response to where I pointed out that the Ulyssilian sorcerers have a hand that is strikingly like that of the Curse-Rotted Greatwood, JSF writes, I'm beginning to wonder if it's also connected to the giant hands that arise from the pus of men. Those are black, but the trees is white. It makes me wonder if cleansing the bastard's curse somehow removes the capital D dark and leaves behind a pallid white version. So, related to what I was just saying, perhaps that's part of the process for, extracting this biofuel, or this deep juice from these undead. I'm largely just throwing things at the wall and hoping that they stick, but I think that if the specifics of that idea aren't correct, then I think that the more general thrust of it is probably true. But I don't know whether it relates to the difference between the white and sort of the black, or like the gray, dark gray of the hands that jump out of the pus of men. I don't know, but all very interesting. JSF continues, Hollow Manservants. I think the clue is in the great machete they sometimes drop, which is called a dismantling tool. They're dismantling the corpses, the remains are in the bowls. Also, Bloodborne's Japanese script calls the large axe-wielding enemies dismantling men, and they seem to fulfill a similar function. Think of it like dismantle equals dismember. Likewise, I'd suggest that the public torture is probably public corpse disposal, a la Hemwick Charnel Lane, rather than a Damien's the Regicide situation. This also fits with the Mortician's ashes, graves, etc. in the area. Evan Wheat writes, "It's interesting to note that the cage spiders are quite weak to thrust damage, but resist slash damage, implying that you have to stab them through the cage as opposed to banging against it. Not really a lore thing, but nonetheless a clever integration of creature concept and gameplay." Yeah, well said. Even if it's not a lore thing, it really does show this attention, this extraordinary attention to detail that FromSoft has, and how there's almost nothing in their games that they don't at least put a little bit of thought into. So yeah, thank you. Bushwookie writes, "That area GSF pointed out is actually just the Undead Settlement. Not the one we visit, just a place that looks identical to the one we visit. I really don't know why it's there. I think Sanadisk made a video zooming up on it. Somebody did because I watched it." And then Bushwookie later commented that they just checked, and the video is called "The Mysterious Area Revealed" by Sanadisk. And yeah, it's the Undead Settlement. Oh, FromSoft, that's so strange. Apex27 writes, "I know what I was suggesting about them being frozen, that is the dragons on the broken bridge, was super far reaching, and there was no evidence to back it up at all. I don't think it was super far reaching, but Apex27 continues, "The main thing that kept nagging at me was the lanterns being stuck and not really swaying at all, and the fact that Yoel's death is much different than the deaths of those around him. With the stone, I considered it maybe turning to stone. It just seems to me that it would have fallen or at least started to hang before it turned to stone. The tail hanging there just seems like more to me than simply being petrified. I'm not saying you're wrong, that's just my feelings about it." Well, I don't think there's any more evidence to support necessarily what I was saying either. So, yeah, no, I'm very open to the whole, everything related to dragons in this game is probably the stuff that I know the least about. So, and yeah, the processes through which the world changes, I don't think anyone really understands it yet. So, you know, it's not really for me to say that you're wrong either, but it's interesting, the difference in ideas. Mega Charizard XL Lechero writes, "I've got a little theory about the identity of I Help Anytime. I Help Anytime is a giant of moderate high, presumably size, you mean? Yorm is higher and the giant slaves in the Cathedral of the Deep are obviously bigger. I Help Anytime looks like the giants of Anri and Horace. Aegon said that he seems to be trying to live up to the legacy of Hawkeye Go. Well, maybe he's not. He's the only friendly giant in the game. He speaks better than the other giants. He has the bow and arrows of Go. Or Goff, I don't know how to pronounce his name. He has the same size as Go. I'll just go with Go for now. There are many connections that might indicate that I Help Anytime is Go. But some of you might ask, but Go lived so many years ago in the Abyss incident of Ulasil. He was an adult. How is he alive? Well, it's clear that the giants live many, many years. In Dark Souls 1, Go says that he's a friend of the giant blacksmith, and the Ulasil incident was like 300 years before the chosen undead began his journey. And I doubt the giant blacksmith was a kid then. Also, sadly, we see the corpse of the giant blacksmith, and he still has skin. That means that he didn't die a long time ago. Also, he has the hawk ring, something that the giant blacksmith had, so maybe Go returned to pay his respects to his old friends and got his ring back. Also, I don't think that he killed the chosen undead and took the arrow and the ring. Also, it's the only giant. Yorm is an exception who uses an actual weapon. The others just try to punch you. And he's a very good archer. He has the skills to shoot small hollows from a great distance, and he seems to have his eyes blocked with his mask. If he is Go, why is he here? Maybe he's trying to have a high place to live in peace, like he did in Ulasil. And if Fair and Keep is Ulasil, then he could have just walked here after the High Wall appeared. And finally, I've heard that if you collect 3 white branches, I Help Anytime dies, so maybe the time of Go has come. At least he would see his old friend again. Rest in peace, friend. We will remember you helping us anytime. So that's all very, very interesting, but I don't see how that could be possible. At the outset, you said that I Help Anytime looks like the Giants of Anri and Horace, but he doesn't really. The Giants of Anri and Horace, if we're to consider the Giants of Anri and Horace, Hawkeye Go, because remember, Hawkeye Go was one of Gwyn's 4 knights. He was intelligent, he was articulate, he was enormous, he was huge, and I Help Anytime is like maybe 25% his size. And also remember that if the player character fells Black Dragon Calamite, Go gives you his great bow and some great arrows. And I don't see why he would do that if he was just going to continue being an archer, being a knight. He was happy just making his carvings. So I really don't know that I can get behind this at all, but I did want to read it because I did think it was an interesting comment, because it really does, I think, stretch for me the conditions of possibility of the world and its rules and its physics. And I don't think we can necessarily say that the giant blacksmith died recently because it still has skin, because there are giants all over the place that don't have skin, and we don't know if giant physiology is similar enough to humans such that, you know, their skin would decompose. It might be different in some way that ensures that it doesn't decompose. And From's not always really consistent with their corpse models either. But yeah, an interesting idea, but I don't agree with it, but I did want to share it with everyone else. So thank you, Mega Charizard XL Lechero. Candidate writes, the interesting thing about comparing the Lothric banner to the Way of White symbol is that the deep ring, which looks like the symbol on the banner, is essentially the exact same ring as the Saint's ring. The Saint's ring is essentially just a simple silver loop, a white ring, like the Way of White symbol. The weapons that the deacons use have the same chain motif as does a DLC weapon, so maybe it was the symbol of the Cathedral of the Deep prior to it being taken over by Aldrich. That the symbol of the cathedral is that of a shackle matches up with the idea that the Deep is home to the shackles of the gods, this notion of impurity again. What I can't wrap my head around, though, is how similar the Way of White symbol is to the Eclipse in the Hollow Lord ending. Something we'll definitely talk about later. Delight of the Endless writes, I think the Deep is just the Abyss by another name. Maybe there is some distinction, but they seem to be basically the same. Both do dark damage, and Abyss Buster weapons do extra damage against both. Moreover, the effects look very similar. The Wolf Knight's helm's tassel is tainted by the dark of the Abyss and is described as damp. Plus, the black goo all over the lower Ulyssil in Dark Souls 1 looks suspiciously like all of the black sludge in Aldrich's room. I posit that the heads of the Cathedral of the Deep wanted the power of the Abyss, but they didn't want to admit to Lothric or the Abyss Watchers that they were messing with Abyss dark magic, so they called it the Deep instead. I don't know if I agree with that last bit. Yeah, I think that the relationship between the Abyss and the Deep is that the Deep is probably constituted with a constituent part of that which constitutes the Abyss. So, because if you think about it, in Dark Souls 1, so in the Artorias of the Abyss DLC, when you go to the Abyss, it doesn't really hurt you. Like, you see its influence. Its influence is not good on the Ulyssil. So, for example, we were discussing the Ulyssil Sorcerer earlier. Not good. It did not look good. But, you know, you could go to the Abyss no problem, and you'd be fine. Now, with that said, when we go to the New Londor ruins later on, and we, because, you know, that's several hundred or thousands of years in the future from the time of the DLC, then we find that, yeah, you can't actually enter the Abyss without a special ring. And, yeah, so all of this is to say that at least in part of Dark Souls 1, humans were the Abyss. Like, it wasn't a problem necessarily. There wasn't really an enormous conflict there. But in Dark Souls 3, going back to the intro from the previous episode, that when the deacons sick the Deep on us, we get cursed. Like really fast. And so that's what has me thinking that the Deep is, rather than being the Abyss proper or just, you know, Abyss by another name, is that it's made up of either the waste products of humanity, the waste products of the Abyss, or both, or some mixture therein. But that, you know, could just be me. Whatchamacallit writes, this is probably a bit too early to talk about, but I always felt that the Deep was sort of the next stage following the Age of Dark. The description of the human dregs makes me think that even if a full Age of Dark had come, eventually the deep sea would spread and cause another end of the world. If I'm not really making any sense, I think the best way to think of it is that the Deep is a sedimentary darkness that has been accumulating in each cycle and does not necessarily go away with the linking of the fire. This sedimentary darkness has been depositing all over the world and filling up in many locations. If that is so, eventually the deep sea will just fill up the world, whether that's during an Age of Dark, Hollows, or Fire. Yeah, that is really, really interesting and a really, really compelling idea. I like that a lot. That is really, really interesting. And it could be, again, I'm not sold on my idea of it being a waste product, because it could be both of these things. It could be made up of several different parts, but yeah, certainly I'm finding this throwing around of ideas very helpful, and I feel like I know a lot more about the Deep than I did a month ago, which is, yeah, pretty huge, because I didn't really know anything. Whatchamacallit also added that maybe people know you're unkindled because there's embers flying off of you. It's a pretty big tell. But again, even if you're not embered, they still mention it. They still know that we're unkindled, so yeah. Video Poster writes, on the bite rings, just wanted to address the comment about the fear of malleable stone. I think malleable stone is synonymous with chaos. Check the description from Great Chaos Fireball. Chaotic flame melts even great boulders. So for the common man to see the stone being modified as required to make the bite ring reminds them of the use of chaotic flame, which is presumably considered sinful to the common man and scary. Be interesting to know if the clerics have harnessed chaos to make the bite rings, or if they have an alternative method. It's interesting idea. Thank you, Video Poster. Traceries writes, I've been trying to sort out why some enemies die and become ragdoll bodies on the ground while others just disappear. For example, in this video, the manservants disappear when killed. Does this somehow reflect their state of being in the world, a hollow undead other? I have not done any extensive cataloging to see what other enemies, regular enemies, disappeared. Do you think there's any significance to this mechanic? This is, I wanted to read this out not because I'm ready to answer it yet, but A, I wanted to throw it out there for everyone else, but B, because this is actually a mechanic that I'm very interested in. In particular, if, because, it'll be a while before we're able to address this fully, because we need to get fairly late in the game to be able to actually start building that type of catalog. But in my blind playthrough, I pretty consistently obsessed after killing Silver Knights that their corpses didn't disappear, when they did in Dark Souls 1. And so, there could be several explanations for that, but my answer to your question about the significance is, we'll talk about this later, but I wanted to thank you for bringing it up, because this is something I actually find kind of interesting too. So thank you, Traceries. Dean Blake writes, the idea that it was the Cathedral of the Deep that locked away the altar of Velka is very interesting to me. It seems she is able to pardon wrongdoings and lift curses, which does not play into the Cathedral's goals for the Hollows at all. If the citizens of the Undead Settlement were able to have their sins forgiven, they would be more likely to be able to be somewhat content despite their surroundings. Cue the evangelists who come through preaching the good word of Aldrich, but find a people who aren't as downtrodden as they seem. By cutting off access to Velka, and by extension forgiveness and a cure for their curses, the evangelists force the undead citizens to become slowly more depraved and desperate, eventually leading them to agreeing to an alternate route to salvation, becoming a sacrifice to Aldrich. Velka could have been the original deity of the Hollows of the Undead Settlement, there are a lot of crows there after all, but had access to her teachings cut off and once again faded into relative obscurity. This may even tie into the fact that the Corvians, found fairly close to the statue in the next area, seem to worship her in some manner. Perhaps they are the former residents of the settlement who continued worshipping her and eventually transformed to be closer to original subjects, the Crow people of the Painted World. So, obviously Dean made this comment before the DLC came out, but yeah, I wanted to read it out because it's pretty prescient for that reason. But thank you, Dean, for a very interesting comment. Hunter M writes, since I can't get the Dark Souls 3 equals Ragnarok ideas out of my head, I don't know how to pronounce many of these words, so you'll have to forgive me in advance. Greirat / Archtree's World Consumed by Fire, Valhalla, analog in Archdragon Peak. I've decided to look into it a few inches deeper, and some of the stuff I'm finding is pretty exciting. Searcher continues to be an interesting figure to me. I mistook him as a fire sorcerer, but he's actually described as a warrior with a flaming sword, Firelink Greatsword, who comes from the south to a walled-off land far to the north, that is Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1 and 2, and after his battle with Freyr, the world will be consumed in flame only to become reborn from the sea, the deep sea. Searcher is prophesied to slay all the gods of the world and sling flames across the earth. Are the generations of chosen undead meant to become a Searcher figure? Maybe this is the mythology that has crystallized in the Lothric royal family, the desire to create a mythic figure in the image of Searcher. Fun fact, Ragnarok literally translates to "it will rain ash." Neato. Yggdrasil, the world tree, is also referred to as a species called an ash tree, a kind that also appears in Greek mythology, another heavy influence on Dark Souls. Now let's talk about Jormungandr, because oh heck yeah, this is a good one. Jormungandr, the world serpent, do I even need to say Koth, is a child of Loki who Odin threw into the ocean, and grew so massive that it could encircle the earth and grasp its own tail. When Yorm lets go of its tail, Ragnarok begins, and during this final battle, a Jormungandr will poison the sky. And how about all those butterflies carrying the poison of the dark sigils on their bodies as they swarm the sky above Lothric? Not to mention the dark sigil that this sun has become. So yeah, very, very interesting. You'll have to forgive me for my poor performance in reading out your comment, just because, yeah, a lot of names that I don't know how to say properly, and I'm really bad at pronunciation in general, so you'll have to forgive me. But thank you, yeah, it's very interesting. Scholar of the Worst Game writes, I hadn't thought of it before, partially because I'm sort of wary of connecting the Pilgrim Butterflies to the Pilgrims of Londor, but if they are related, that would mean, in turn, a connection to Velka, given her apparent affiliation with Londor. And if that were the case, it might lend a little more weight to the notion of an apocalyptic cult of sorts being practiced by the underclass of Lothric, praying and yearning for an end to the cycles of oppression. As your idea of Velka as a particularly popular god for the oppressed and exploited makes all kinds of sense to me, given what we know about her. Also, one of the things that's made me more receptive to a connection between the Pilgrims proper and the Butterflies, not that that matters. Following from your idea mentioned above, the fact that the one skeleton at least is wearing a hat associated with the hollows there might be indicative of them having served or at least worshipped Velka in some capacity, perhaps protecting the shrine. Velka is one of the original gods associated with Carim, circa Dark Souls 1, before they seemingly conquered Thorland and assimilated the Way of White, which vaguely parallels the assimilation of Christianity by the Roman Empire in real life. Other persons and groups from Carim, as we know, have made their way to the settlement and made their presence known, such as Aegon and Irina. When I first found this statue, one of the first things I did was go back to the Painted World to check the statue in the courtyard there, and sure enough, they are very similar. It has long been speculated with good reason that the statue depicted Velka, and this sealed the deal for me, so I found a very cool little revelation of sorts. And Scholar of the Worst Game goes on to say, but I didn't get this comment for some reason, the presence of the skeletons near the Velka shrine with the trees going out of their bones connects to my thoughts in that old post about bodies as seedbeds, to my newer thoughts connecting that whole business with Velka. Before now, the tree growth from human remains in the settlement was always very puzzling and didn't quite fit with my other ideas. This now lends me some infinitesimal and highly circumstantial evidence for my crackpot ideas. Haha. Yeah, yours was one of the comments in that episode that I had prepared to read, but that I just ran out of time. So I wanted to make sure I read this one, so you'll have to accept my sincerest apologies for having not read that one yet. But yeah, I'm, again, really bad in that I over-prepare for everything and then I run out of time, so please forgive me. Tim S. writes, from what I can tell, Hodrick appeared in the Pit of Hollows the first time you go down there. Since you died, the body might have despawned. I would have to do some testing with this. Also of note is that if you don't get the Homeward Bone from Hodrick after you join the Mound Makers, he will still have it on his corpse. Since you took that item, that body might not have any need to spawn. Again, I need to test this. Also with Loretta's bone, the Carthus Rouge, unlike the other items you apply to your weapons, uses what looks like a bone as the device used to create/extract the substance in the bowl. The others use a sort of wood scoop. So what is so different about the Rouge that it requires a bone? I think Loretta could have been making substances using her bone, and it has holes in it from repeated use. The end of it looks like it was meant to scoop something out as it's hollowed out. Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you, Tim, for sharing that. Deso Penguin writes, very interesting discussion material as always, and an extremely neat intro. I'd never taken the time to stop and look around in the Deacon's fight, and the one time the curse bar even started filling on me, I looked even less because I was focused on killing the boss before I died. The exact same thing happened to me, I believe in my blind playthrough and several playthroughs after that. I didn't actually notice because yeah, I always just wanted to get the boss fight done, but if you stop and smell the roses a little bit sometimes, and I'm guilty of not doing that a lot of the time, but certainly not in this episode, I don't think. But yeah, if you stop and smell the roses, you learn interesting things sometimes. The rising tides of the deep do indeed seem to be threatening to consume the world, which fits nicely with Aldrich's Age of the Deep Sea. I wonder if this is due to the flames burning for too long. One could almost make an environmental abuse kind of argument. Like how in Final Fantasy VII, for example, Mako energy is literally the life energy of the planet being misused as an industrial power source. Keeping the first flame burning for too long may be resulting in some kind of waste product or other imbalance, or impurity/corruption. I wonder if the word Kagari ever comes up in any of the Japanese item descriptions for the deep. I also wonder if the usurp ending thwarts the Age of the Deep Sea, and if the end the fire ending, the intentional putting out of the first flame, would be different than just sitting around and letting it gutter out/be drowned on its own. The Great Wood boss, unfortunately, is just triggered by proximity. I've snuffed out all the hollows before starting the fight in the past, when I was playing builds that I wasn't as confident in their playstyle. I wish it was the red-eyed guy's death that did it, since as you noted, it's the only red-eyed one, and the one that's farthest away. When we consider that the Great Wood is a vessel for curses, the reason for the worship could be for the peasant hollows to purge themselves, and it would have been a neat idea if the death of the red-eye one sent his curse to the tree and that awakened it. Too bad, really, indeed. One thing about Loretta, she's already dead, but if she's just plain dead, then she wasn't an undead and did not fall to that curse, which would mean that she did not fall prey to the constant tortures of the evangelists. Almost a relief, really, indeed. So yeah, the dead or undeadness of various characters in the game is something I'm very, very unclear about and very confused about. But yeah, something for us to discuss in an upcoming episode. Dahlia writes, Velka does have similarities to quite a few deities of various religions. One I'm most familiar with is comparable from an aesthetic point of view and general neutral nature of her personality to the goddess the Morrigan, who is known mostly as a goddess of war, even though she is rather a goddess of everything. But the Morrigan does not impose a code of ethics on her worshippers. Rather, it is the ethics of her followers that they would follow. Those who wrong her children, as devotees of the Morrigan are called, find themselves at the mercy of the vengeful nature of justice, or rather an approximation of justice. The Morrigan is also a deity that does not always actively interact with her worshippers, other deities, or the world at large. She also is associated with ravens and crows, and as such is a silent watcher of all things, privy to wisdom and knowledge others will never possess. Alas, that is just how I see their parallels, though due to the problematic nature of how Celtic practices were recorded, by Catholic monks who would have seen an independent and self-governing goddess of war and glorious death as quite threatening to their patriarchal order, most of her mythology and practices of worship have been lost to history. Well, thank you very kindly for sharing it with us then. That's very interesting. Thank you, Dahlia. Matt Doe writes, I think the ideas you presented in the last episode, that is episode 4, make a lot of sense, particularly gravity bending time. The gravitational pull of the first flame has distorted time to the degree that we find multiple Firelink Shrines and a coalescing of geography so strong that time's linearity is shattered. Is the Dark Firelink Shrine after championing Gundr the past, present, or future? Same question for the Firelink Shrine that is just before the Soul of Cinder. I really like the idea that you are playing through different times. I think that might explain why you see Archdragon Peak from Irithyll at night, and when you were transported there it's a bright blue sky. I don't think that is a representation of time elapsing from night to day, but a completely different time in history altogether. gravitational time dilation is a real thing that in a suspended video game reality way seems to be a plausible explanation of time and physical space in Dark Souls 3. Wikipedia's definition reads, clocks that are far from massive bodies or at lower gravitational potentials run more quickly, and clocks close to massive bodies or at higher gravitational potentials run more slowly. You mentioned in the beginning of the episode the idea that Lothric may not be high above the rest of the world, but that everything else has sunken, or more accurately, have been pulled down by a colossal force. I think that is the case. Lastly, the eclipse we see after defeating the third Lord of Cinder has that very distinct line running down from the center. Could whatever sun or celestial body that is being eclipsed be under the same gravitational pull as the rest of the world, thus explaining the very unmistakable line descending below the horizon? So, all very, very interesting stuff, so thank you kindly, Matt, as always. The first thought I have is that I think that the Untended Graves is just the present. That is, if indeed we can describe any of the areas in Dark Souls 3 as the waking world, I think the closest thing would be either A, Lothric, or B, the Kiln. Those would be the most true to reality areas that there is, if there's a main timeline in sort of this multiverse. The sky thing, that's always been a thing in the Souls games. So, for example, when you go from the Undead Parish to Darkroot Garden, how it becomes night, and it's just perpetually night there, and that's just kind of how it is. And what's more is that it's not entirely clear that the Archdragon Peak we go to is even in the same dimension as that which we find ourselves when we're in Irithyll Dungeon, because it seems odd that they would have animated the likes of the Batwing demons bringing us from Vort's boss room to the foot of the high wall. Why animate that and then not animate our entrance to Archdragon Peak? It seems strange to me. But yeah, the skies being different, that's just always been a thing. But I do think that there are other valid ways of looking at the multiple Firelink Shrines, but we don't really have time to get into that today, but it's something that we will be talking about soon. So yeah, again, sincerest apologies if I didn't read yours. Thank you to everyone for participating and being awesome, and yeah, I always learn a lot when making these episodes, and I hope that you do as well. I'm exhausted, so that's going to do it for this episode, but thank you all very, very much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.